Good to have you, sir. It's truly a pleasure to have you back at City Book Leaders. Last time, yet again, we discussed flying birds. And today we're going to discuss about what those flying birds over Afghanistan have been doing. So from Jishan's book to now today, Sujeet's book, good to have you. We are a community of friends of books, and you will see a lot of people from services as well being part of it. Couple of ambassadors who have also joined in. We understand you have a jury to attend in a couple of minutes. So we won't keep you waiting for long. And before we start our discussion on the book, we would love you to say a few words on the book and why is it so that every Indian should actually read this book?
Excellent. Now, I was told that I should begin by holding the book up to the cameras and officially announcing its launch. Is that right? There we are.
Yes.
So we can now declare The Quest for a Stable Afghanistan by Sujeet Sarkar launched. Well, I think that it's been, for me, a very insightful reading. What was striking is, of course, that it was written initially before the fall of Kabul. Indeed, one is seeing a great deal of fascinating material in this book, which reviews news reports and interviews with leaders of the time, with tremendous amount of really strong and knowledgeable analysis, because don't forget, Sujeet Sarkar has written an earlier book on Afghanistan in 2012 called Quest for a New Afghanistan. And this time, I think he was able pretty much to foretell, if not with exact timing, but he certainly foretold why the various failures of the international community in Afghanistan was likely to result in the country essentially returning into the hands of the Taliban 20 years after they were ousted. So in the 9 years between the quest for a new Afghanistan to the quest for a stable Afghanistan, we've ended up with a relatively unstable and certainly not a new, but an old Afghanistan once again. And I think that there's a lot in this book that makes it clear why we have ended up where we have, which is why the book is so much worth reading. One important factor to bear in mind is, of course, the extraordinary follies of the US, starting with their taking the eye off the ball in 2003 with their distraction by a totally unnecessary adventure or misadventure in Iraq at a time when they could have consolidated their military control over Afghanistan. I remember my old friend Ahmed Rashid, the Pakistani journalist, actually coming to Washington at his own expense to plead with every decision maker that he could find not to take the focus away from Afghanistan and move to Iraq. He failed, and the US folly in essentially taking their eye off the ball in Afghanistan meant that that ball crashed into their own wicket. They also had some naive assumptions, such as the Taliban would disarm and so on. And I'm not sure that they were particularly well served by their allies. The UK, which completely misread Helmand, the people advising them to conduct a peace process and its increasing failures, the extraordinarily risky strategy adopted by Pakistan of running with the hare and hunting with the hounds, in which what the Pakistanis did basically was to give shelter to the entire Taliban leadership and to control them through the various shuras in Quetta and Peshawar, in Miramshah, and sponsor, in effect, the rebuilding of the Taliban to a point where we'd be in a position to take over the country again. And at the same time, the Americans were so conscious of their dependence on the Pakistani military in order to be able to supply their forces in Afghanistan and to allow them to function with a modicum of peace, that you ended up with essentially the Americans conniving in their own betrayal. It's really the story of a cuckold who was perfectly aware that he was being cuckolded and at the same time felt he could not in any way reduce his dependency on the cuckold. And so this is precisely what has happened with the US and Pakistan. There's also been, of course, and Sujeet is certainly quite candid about it, a fair amount of corruption in the Afghan political leadership. failed governance. And there is an interesting section that talks about the poppy business and the role in that poppy and opium cultivation has played in financing the depredations of the Taliban, the Haqqani network in particular, and others, their ability to essentially keep themselves well-funded in a way to be able to pursue their political and military goals, while at the same time, of course, destroying the future of young generations around. And in the meantime, of course, there is some sidelong reference to what one might call the proxy battle between India and Pakistan. I have to say that there's nothing that's missing from the book, nothing that I felt we would have to say was needed in this volume that was missing. In many ways, what we're seeing with someone like Sujeet Sarkar, or I shouldn't say someone like, but what we're seeing with Sujeet Sarkar is somebody who is deeply, deeply knowledgeable and who at the same time is a very undemanding writer in that you read without any difficulty. There are not too many unfamiliar references. There's no assumptions on the part of the writer about the audience. And so you can actually acquire the knowledge you wish to acquire. In the weeks since Afghanistan's fitful attempt at democracy collapsed, when the Taliban seized power, the people of Afghanistan, and particularly its women, have been subjected to unimaginable suffering, even as the attention of the world seems to turn to other issues. But I think India in particular, as a near neighbor, has to worry, and that's why this book is so relevant for Indian readers. The Taliban's victory against the staggering might of the American military and 20 years of unsuccessful nation building, so-called, will do much to embolden not only its fellow jihadists, but shake up the geopolitics of the region. And I think we in India rightly paid attention to the behavior of Prime Minister Imran Khan and other senior members of Pakistan's establishment when all this happened. And notably, Imran Khan's statement that the Taliban seizure of power was akin to throwing off the shackles of slavery. I think this emphasizes what was already known by all, that Taliban-run Kabul is deeply under the influence of Islamabad. When they were in power the first time around, from 1996 to 2001, the Taliban so-called Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan functioned as a wholly owned subsidiary of the Pakistani services. Control is supposed to be a little less absolute, but that did not prevent ISI Chief Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid from traveling to Kabul soon after its fall to preside triumphantly over the formation of its turbaned and bearded government, not a single woman minister or anyone else in it. Less overtly, but arguably even more importantly, I think China has been quietly working its networks to ensure that it can get the best out of a delicate situation. They have, of course, invested $90 billion in their China-Pakistan economic corridor, the single largest project of the flagship Belt and Road Initiative. And they're anxious that hotheads in next-door Afghanistan do not jeopardize its success, which may be why Foreign Minister Wang Yi formally received a Taliban delegation in July. I see only 3 references in Sujeet's book to the CPEC and not many more to China. Perhaps if I had to express a wish for his next foray into that country's future, that he will look a little more at what the Chinese are up to. I think economic and geopolitical gains are ripe for the taking. China has announced it will do business with the Taliban. It wants to dig up the country's considerable underexploited mineral resources, especially rare earths, and reopen the Mes Aynak copper mine. And there's even talk of extending CPEC to Afghanistan. So that's one subject that is not sufficiently treated in this book, if I had to have a minor demurral. But, we're seeing the senior Taliban official calling China a trustworthy friend, eager and willing, apparently, to ignore China's systematic persecution of its own minority Muslims. Beijing's priority is to ensure that the Taliban offer neither support nor refuge to Uyghur dissidents seeking to end the Han domination of Xinjiang. And of course, they want the Afghans to do nothing to disturb the functioning of the CPEC. And this is all right because the new government in Kabul desperately needs patronage. We often fail to remember that 80% of the previous government's $5.5 billion budget was financed by external assistance. So China must look to many in the Taliban as an ideal alternative to fill the breach. But I think that we should read Sujeet Sarkar carefully because the entire dynamic in Afghanistan is of huge concern to India. Pakistan, after all, is a long-term adversary that has actively funded and fomented armed militancy against our country, hosting, amongst other things, the organizers of the murderous 2008 Mumbai terror attacks, our 26/11. China is a systemic rival now, poses an increasingly overt economic, military, and strategic threat. And China and Pakistan have become increasingly close over the years. So the emergence of a potential Afghanistan-Pakistan-China axis, willing, and they've said so openly, to coordinate their policies, is a matter of concern, or should be a matter of concern for all Indian policymakers. Beijing and Islamabad may both be emboldened to pursue more assertive policies against New Delhi. And the Taliban takeover does give Pakistan the so-called strategic depth that its military have long sought against India. But a state run by a fundamentalist terrorist group can prove a useful recruitment ground for more militants and terrorists, should the ISI be minded to deploy them again. You may remember the last time this happened, India made common cause with Russia and Iran in working actively to support the Panjshir insurgency of the Northern Alliance under the late Ahmad Shah Massoud. But this time, an increasingly pro-Beijing Russia has taken a neutral stance on Afghanistan's issues with India, with its envoy speaking dismissively of New Delhi. Iran, under a newly elected hardline president and government, seems willing to see some merit in the new Islamic Emirate, as long as the Taliban avoids the anti-Shia persecution that characterized its last reign. So if the Hazaras, who are Shias, the Tajiks and Uzbeks, other minorities, are saved the worst of what the Taliban inflicted upon them a quarter of a century ago, then Iran too might be tempted to stay neutral. And both, in any case, are gleeful that Washington has received its comeuppance in Kabul. And now, this time, the Panjshir Valley is largely under Taliban control, and Massoud's son and heir is reliably reported to have taken refuge in Tajikistan, along with the brave Vice President Amrullah Saleh. I don't think India will find it either necessary or feasible to extend any military support for the resistance as we had done in the past, and 25 years ago. Now, we could, of course, attempt to reach out to the new Kabul government, but I don't know how easily we can do that. And certainly there's been no sign of us making any serious efforts right now to do that. We've had diplomats in touch with the Afghans in Doha, and two of our Doha interlocutors have been included in the new Taliban government, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, the new first deputy prime minister, and Sher Muhammad Abbas Tanikzai, the deputy foreign minister. But the extent of their influence is as yet unclear, because Baradar actually spent 8 years in Pakistani jails, and Pakistan may well have curbed any notions of independence on his part. And some Taliban voices have openly stated that as an Islamic Emirate, it will stand up for Muslims in India, especially in Kashmir, which is going to certainly make things more than slightly awkward for the government in Delhi. So I'm not suggesting that all is bad. I don't think Pakistan can afford to be complacent about the Taliban's victory. The emergence of the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which seeks to overthrow the government in Islamabad, which they see as insufficiently Islamist, and of the fanatics who bombed Kabul airport in August and who call themselves the Islamic State Khorasan. This should be triggering tremors of anxiety in Islamabad. Just recently, I think this week, we had a statement out of Islamabad that there were people, ISI elements, attacking Pakistan from Afghanistan, and the Afghans reacted by saying the elements are in Pakistan and they're troubling Afghanistan. So not everything is 100% smooth sailing between the Taliban regime and the Islamabad regime. But let's face it, we have to be concerned because the end of America's troop presence in Afghanistan may have reduced Washington's logistical dependence on the Pakistani security establishment. But the Taliban needs Pakistan, and of course, they need China. So we have every reason to feel despondent. Sujeet Sarkar has given us a very thorough and detailed analysis. And I have to say that that there's a lot of material in what's going on since August that he must be collecting for a third volume in what I hope is going to be a solid trilogy on Afghanistan. Let us hope that Sujeet Sarkar does not keep us waiting 9 years for the next volume. But in the meantime, this one will give us a lot to think about, with the Taliban state to our northwest, a nuclear-armed terror-supporting state to our west, a hostile superpower to our northeast, and continuing threats to our territorial integrity. Indian diplomacy can simply not afford to be indifferent to Afghanistan. Afghanistan remains a major challenge to rise to in the months and years ahead. And as a companion to our knowledge of that country, this book is undoubtedly an excellent companion for us to have as we navigate our understanding of this perilous situation. My congratulations to Sujeet Sarkar for writing it. Thank you to Mohit and City Book Leaders for having this event. I shall have to abandon you shortly and head off to an event where my physical presence is required, but I want to wish you all success and wish you a stimulating discussion later on. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you. And Dr. Tharoor, thank you very much. This was the perfect microbite for the book to reach the miles it deserves, and especially with Sujeet's compatibility with the global situation that he deals in his day work. I think the pandemic has given him reasons to move it fast, just to complete the second book in 9 years. And I'm sure the third book would definitely come. Sujeet, any thoughts on Dr. Tharoor's remarks?
What can I say? The challenge of a budding author like us is to speak after Dr. Tharoor, He's so eloquent and knowledgeable in his own subject and domain. It looks very bad, when you speak after him. But thank you, sir, for coming and gracing this occasion. You have been very helpful and generous to, a small-time writer like us. I remember first time, in 2012, I just wrote a mail. I got your Gmail address and I said, please, sir, come and, launch this book. And you really graced that occasion. Thanks a lot again, sir, for coming.
Thank you and good luck, Sujeet.
Thank you.
Think about China a little more than you have in this book. I worry about China.
Thank you.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you. Namaskar, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I think that was the good start to a subject that definitely needs this kind of a warm-up. We welcome you, Sujeet, and everyone else who has been who has tuned in on a weekday, and that too on an evening. Possibly, what I can make out, there are a lot of people who are at home, or possibly they have logged in their vehicles while they are going back to their homes from their offices. Ladies and gentlemen, I now formally introduce the author of the evening, Sujeet, to all of you. In the remaining 45 minutes or 40 minutes, we will cover up some very interesting and fascinating aspects of the book, which a glimpse has already been given by Dr. Tharoor in his keynote. Sujeet, to all of you, Sujeet Sarkar is the former global lead of governance with the Aga Khan Foundation, Geneva. He currently works as the global chief operating officer for an international aid agency working towards improving quality of life of marginalized and disadvantaged section of the society across Asia and Africa. And that's primarily one of the reasons why his book has a lot of rich content, which is just not the basic theory or the Google information, but a lot of things have come out of his own experience. The author also writes columns regularly on South Asian affairs for leading international dailies. Sarkar had his formal education in development from India and an advanced management course from Case Western Reserve University, Ohio. I won't tell his age because just by seeing him, you can make out he's very young. That's what the bio says though, but I will not disclose it to all of you. Welcome, Sujeet, and it's truly a pleasure to read your book. Though it was in a short notice, I would like to convey my thanks to Rupa Publications for yet again one very fascinating book for curious readers like us. And I can see a lot of history enthusiasts, policy enthusiasts, and people who believe in seeing all sides of a subject and taking a 360-degree view are here at this point of time. While in the introduction, a bit was definitely covered by Dr. Tharoor, but my first question to you, and possibly I would like to put the spotlight on this part of the book, which is actually very unique. I have not found it in many other open books per se, which is on the Poppynomics, because ultimately it's all about the economics that blossom anything that happens under the land. It's the geography that defines us, then it's the history that makes us, and then finally, it all boils down to economics. In Afghanistan's case, ladies and gentlemen, this is really remarkable. It's 90% or more than 90% of the global poppy cultivation that fits in, feeds a lot of Chester in terms of getting the right armaments. That's what Taliban needs. So my first question to you, Sujeet, would be, tell us something more about Poppynomics. What is this poppy thing in Afghanistan and how it is impacting? You have given some fascinating numbers and some data which will definitely be an eye-opener to all of us.
Good evening, Mohit, once again, and good evening to all the audiences who have joined from different parts of India, and I guess also a few of my friends from Afghanistan. It's a matter of indeed privilege to have intellectual audience like you, connecting with intellectual audience like you are. Just one line, I would like to add with the whatever generous introduction my friend Mohit has given, is that I work as a global chief operating officer of an international agency called as RAF Global. We work in 7 countries across Asia and Africa, improving quality of life. Coming to the poppy, and in my chapter I have written that poppy is the axis of all evil. It poisons Afghanistan, it corrupts the bureaucracy, and it fuels insurgency in Afghanistan. If I can quote a UN report, the report says that Taliban reportedly makes close to $200 to $250 million per year from the poppy trade. Now, where does the money go? The money goes to Taliban, clearly, to procure lethal arms and ammunition, to design, war strategies, lethal war strategies, and also to recruit, Taliban soldiers at a salary which is 3 times more than what an Afghan army soldiers would be given by the government of Afghanistan. So the whole money is, used to fund the nefarious design of Taliban in Afghanistan. Now, if I can give you some number, in 2001, when US occupied Afghanistan, poppy was grown in close to 73,000 hectares of land in Afghanistan. Now, as early as 2004, there was a strong realization at the top leadership of US that if you want to irreversibly degrade the capacities of Taliban, you have to root out, eliminate poppy from the soils and minds of the farmer from Afghanistan. And rightly, they employed close to $40 billion in eradicating poppy from Afghanistan. $40 billion in 20 years. Technically, that means $2 billion every year. What is the result? After 20 years, poppy, if I can talk about cultivation area, poppy cultivation is increased by 3-fold. Now it is grown in, if I can quote 2009 data, it is grown in close to about 273,000 hectares, so more than 3 times. And opium production, which is the next product of poppy in the value chain, has increased 30 times than what it was in 2001. And this again, after employing $40 billion to eradicate poppy from Afghanistan. Now, where we went wrong? The US and UK was basically spearheading the whole intellectual leadership of this movement. First, they, created a poppy eradication force. The poppy eradication force, went to the fields of the farmer, with bulldozer, with sticks, and, destroyed the standing crop. As a result of which, all the farmers, overnight turned to the side of Taliban, particularly in southern belt of Afghanistan, like Helmand, like, Kandahar, and all other places, Uruzgan, all other places. So they joined the Taliban. So basically, the faulty eradication strategy, strengthened the Taliban. Secondly, what they did is that when this didn't work, they, started spraying insecticide, pesticide over the poppy crop. The lot of, noise made by the parliamentarians that, this is also spoiling the water and all those things. It will have a long-term effect and things like that. That was stopped. And finally, in 2017, I think only US can think this kind of strategy. They employed, F-22 Raptor stealth aircraft, B-52 bomber jet, and M-42 tactical missile launcher to destroy the non-descriptive, mud structures of poppy, the basic laboratory of poppy, which will hardly cost, about $5,000 to $10,000 per laboratory. And the flying cost of this machine for 1 hour is $35,000 US. So they continued this campaign for 1 year, no success. And finally, as I told you, 30 times more poppy is grown, as compared to the past. So that means this whole poppy eradication strategy has gone horrendously wrong, and in a way, it has become counterproductive. because it has given, more resources to the Taliban, and that's why we see a much dreader or lethal version of Taliban than what we saw in 2001. Yeah, Mohit, please.
So I think in a nutshell, if I say in the present management jargon, because you just quoted US's thinking, it's called a poor economics, where F-22 bomber, which has a high economic impact, is destroying something which has absolutely no relevance per se. That is one. Also, while we talk about the war in Afghan, I think it's a complete miss in terms of the human-centric thinking, especially when the first narrative or the budgets were installed way back in 2002 or prior to that as well, just after the Cold War, because prior to that in your book, you have also mentioned, and also in Stephen Leib's book, which is a very remarkable book on the same subject towards the Northwest province, I've come across a very, very interesting fact, which I should tell everyone, where you've mentioned that the CIA trucks used to take arms inside Afghanistan and used to bring opium back from Afghanistan without even asking a question. So that means they also participated in the value chain. And today, if you see the numbers in US, it is 56,000 high heroin deaths that are happening in US. Russia is no far with close to 32,000 deaths. And this is slightly old number. In the pandemic, I'm sure because of the dopamine requirement, this number would have gone up. So we may have to possibly increase it by some percentage. Now, in this entire thing, Sujeet, what do you think? What has gone wrong in the design thinking? We consider the West to be fair amount in terms of they're doing it right at the first time. But this entire 30-year ploy gives us a very different picture. Do we really depend upon them on such policy making, especially when it comes to Asia or say countries like this part of the world?
See, if I talk about the Afghan war, there are plethora of, problems, which you can see, when you work in Afghanistan, even from outside, And if I can pinpoint, 4 or 5 key reasons, what led to the collapse of Afghanistan. First and foremost is that, this is a war right from the day one. The US was fighting half the enemy. Why I call half the enemy? Because the Taliban were chased to kill on the Afghan side of the border, while the same Taliban were allowed to blossom, allowed to nurture, allowed to be given coaching, mentoring by ISI, and all those things on the other side of the border, that is Pakistan. Now, will someone explain to me how will one win a war? When you treat the same enemy differently depending upon which side of the border they are. So that was, and this not only me, a lot of British general, American commander, they have been saying it right from 2003-4 that this is not a winnable war. You have to change the strategy to deal Pakistan with an iron hand. So that was, one of the big reasons that it was always fighting half the enemy. The second thing is that, like in 2012, when my first book was released, I was appearing in an interview in NDTV, and the interviewer asked me one question, the journalist, is that, what is going to define the future of Afghanistan? By the way, I was very positive about Afghanistan in 2012, in my first book, and I said, precisely 2 things. First and foremost thing is that if US can contain the strategic ability of Afghanistan to aid and abet terrorism in Afghanistan, I think the war is won by USA. So that was the point I made, in 2012. The ability or the role of Pakistan, especially ISI, in aiding and abetting terrorism is completely documented in White House, Pentagon, everywhere. All the 4 previous presidents dealing with the Afghan war, right from George W. Bush, Senior Bush, to the incumbent President Joe Biden, who was earlier also the deputy of Obama, like they all sucked into the whole war. They knew that Pakistan is creating fanning strategic unrest in Afghanistan. Still, for reasons better known to them, they never dealt Pakistan with an iron hand. At best, what they did is used a carrot and stick policy, whereby they controlled Pakistan through finance, linking their performance in Afghan war with grant and all those things. Those kind of soft measures were being used by White House to contain Pakistan. Now, if you see President Trump, in Afghanistan, among all the Afghanis, if you talk, they were hopeful that President Trump is going to toe a different path, because he was charging Pakistan outrightly, squarely blaming Pakistan for fanning strategic unrest in Afghanistan. But, and there was a series of acerbic tweets, whereby he went to the extent that, Pakistan is playing a game of deceit and duplicity. On one side, they are showing that they are with the war on Afghanistan. Other side, they are supporting the same Taliban, to create a strategic unrest in Afghanistan. However, after a year or so, he started scheduling the same Pakistan, the same ISI Pakistan army for reasons better known to him. So, so Pakistan, US was never able to deal Pakistan with a very iron hand, to tow a path in Afghanistan. So that was, second thing. Poppy have already spoken, there's a greater realization in the top leadership of Pentagon that if you want to, control or stabilize Afghanistan, Poppy has to be taken out of the equation. However, despite trying n number of strategies, employing a whopping $40 billion, they couldn't control Poppy. Fourth was this ill-negotiated peace process. 2012 onwards, US was absolutely clear that they're not going to win this war anytime soon. So what they started a strategy is that, they overnight become an apostle of peace. And they said that, let's, discuss with Taliban, with the same Taliban whom they have gone there to eliminate. And then, a quadrilateral peace group was formed. And then finally, Zulmai Khalilzad, who was hired, to streamline or to fast track the peace process. Now, Zulmai Khalilzad was in a tearing hurry, to conclude the peace deal because of two reasons. A is that, he wanted to be a man Friday for, President Trump on Afghanistan. And B, President Trump wanted to, conclude this peace deal and bolster his deal-making image, before going to the second round of presidential election. As a result of which, the peace process was heavily compromised. Now, I have never seen a peace process, whereby Monday to Friday, the US soldiers and Taliban will kill each other. And then on Saturday, they'll reach Doha and, start singing peace carol, breaking bread together and things like that. So in the peace process, the ill-negotiated peace process, in a way, legitimized the Taliban, and mainstream them into the international media, into the international community, and given the advantage to Taliban. So the peace process also has to be blamed a lot. And I'm glad that, in the last month or so, I was reading one of the interviews of Zulmai Khalilzad, in which he said that I was left with no other option because I know Afghanistan, US is going to lose the war. So that's why, I hurried the peace process. So there is a realization at his end also. And finally, as Shashi Tharoor sir was saying, that, this dwindling, state legitimacy, the failure of the state. Now imagine, this is a nation, this is a country where for every person, the concept of nationhood comes second. First is their ethnicity, their, region, their local commander, they're better organized in terms of those than the state as such, unlike India. Now, this was a wonderful, opportunity after getting so much, huge resources for state building to transform that feeling, to transform that situation and, confine all the people or basically, add all the people in the fabric of the nation. However, it was lost, the GDP, which was as high as 21.9% in 2009, slipped to a dismal minus negative 1.9% in 2020. The public service, budget, which was initially, reaching to almost 90% of Afghanistan. By 2018, it only reached to about 30-40% of Afghanistan, and that too, 90% of it was dependent on foreign budgeting. In corruption, for the last 4 or 5 years, concurrently, Afghanistan was, getting into the last 5, corrupt country of the world. So you take any parameter of state building, it failed grossly. So these are the reasons, that led to the collapse of Afghanistan.
Certainly, I think, Sujeet, you just mentioned about the ethnicity, the race. I would like to quote one book from His Excellency Ambassador Rajiv Dogra's book, which is The Duran's Curse. And he has quoted Alexander when he actually went back and everyone asked about his experience of crossing Afghanistan. And he said, may God keep you away from the venom of the cobra, the teeth of the tiger, and the revenge of the Afghans. So while it's the revenge of the Afghans that we all should worry now, what do you think India as a country, because I think that's prima facie, most of us are keeping it in their minds. Now it has already happened. You foretold it way much before anyone could have even imagined. And I think you had the horoscope in your thinking. So what do you think India should be cautious of, or what could be India's stance here?
See, I don't want to boost my soothsayer credential, but there are serious implications for India, and I'm glad that, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh nicely articulated in the last few interviews that, India has to worry, India has to deal with many fronts with, the situation evolving in Afghanistan. Now, let me, give few points, First and foremost is that, unfortunately, this war in Afghanistan has served a very bad template, for all the terror groups in Pakistan. The template is that no matter how powerful the power is, like US in case of Afghanistan, if you engage them with a long and protracted battle of war, with the support of these deep states of Pakistan, you can defeat the enemy, as it has happened in Afghanistan. No, all this, Lashkar-e-Taiba, all Jassim Muhammad, Lashkar-e-Jahangir, JKLF, all these people will try to extend this template to their favorite destination, Kashmir. So we must brace up for more attack, more bloodbath, even though Indian army is superior, far superior in their own terrain than any damn army in the world. Still, we must brace up, for more bloodbath, for more, heightened terror attack in Kashmir. Second thing is that if you read all the intelligence report of, Kashmir terrorists who have been captured or killed in the last 5-6 years particularly, and I read a lovely book called as The Lover Boy of Bawalpur, in which the nephew of Jassim Muhammad founder was killed, The terrorist, the Pakistan-sponsored terrorists, so they are being trained in Afghanistan, particularly in Helmand. Now imagine all these terrorists being trained in Afghanistan for the last 10 years when we have a very pro-India and friendly government sitting in Kabul. What is going to happen when this government, which has 17 UN-proscribed terrorists, and all of them are pro-ISI, radical, leaders of Taliban sitting in the power corridor of Kabul? Obviously, they would like to, give, breeding grounds for terrorists to Pakistan, and Pakistan has dual advantage. A is that, they want to, escape from this FATF, ban, grey list. They're already in grey list, So they would like to outsource all these, breeding ground of terrorism, right from Waziristan and all those tribal areas to Afghanistan in some remote and inaccessible corner. Third thing is that Taliban, if you see US intelligence report, they are saying there are 65,000 Taliban fighters. Out of them, 35 to 40,000 has been already incorporated in the current incumbent government in Kabul. 30,000 is left. Now, these are jihadists. They're not going to work for a salary. Bulk of them is not going to work from a salary. And ISI is not going to leave any stone unturned, to again, reorient them with the anti-India sentiment to wage a battle in Kashmir. So that is also, one of the biggest, worry that's going to, our India. The fourth thing is that the Taliban, of 2001 is very different. The Taliban of 2021 is very different than the Taliban of 201. Now, earlier, there was only Pakistan and Taliban. Now, as Shashi Tharoor sir was saying, China is a big player. So the China, Pakistan axis is going to play in full velocity in Afghanistan. And India must prepare to deal with more pressure point beyond Kashmir. So these are, the implications that outrightly India has to face in the coming years.
I think just to add to the horror, I guess, Sujeet, you have just captured it so well. But I was also going through some of the reports, especially while preparing for this session of yours. With the new oil discoveries, the new gas discoveries, and the requirement, that entire corridor, the infrastructure corridor that China is now trying to build, and also the emergence of ISIS, yet again, a debacle by the US policymakers when they refused farmers of Syria the money just for their not to cross the border. And that amount has now costed them in some trillions. So I think there's a very interesting question that has come from a friend of ours. She is based out of US. She's asking, isn't it the new model of imperialism, and especially after Afghanistan, Iraq, Palestine, Vietnam, all these big boys are now trying to lobby into something which they say, okay, this is my toy, I will play with it. But possibly they don't have any idea. They don't understand that land very well. they are more businessmen rather than just the policymakers. What's your view on that? This is from Ruchi Sharma. She has asked it from US.
No, I subscribe her opinion, and the problem is, if you see in Afghanistan, Iraq also have, studied a lot, Iraq, what is happening is that, policy making is, happening with very little input from the local context, from the leaders, relevant leaders, who can really make a difference. I quote, one ex-NSA, National Security Advisor of Afghanistan, Mr. Rahmatullah Nabil. He said once to his counterpart in USA that, look, this is the GPS coordinate of, 40 terrorists sitting in Pakistan. You kill 20, and I'm giving you the name of, 10 generals of Pakistan Army. You sanction them. I'm telling you, within a year or so, Afghan problem is solved. And that's why that's also the frustration of not only me, but all the Afghan friends whom I used to interact, the ministers I used to interact, and they used to say the same thing, that they know, everything is there on record. In fact, the Vice President Amrullah Saleh, current Vice President, Amrullah Saleh went to President Musharraf and said, all these terrorists are in your sitting place, sitting in Pakistan. He was furious. President was furious. President, Musharraf was furious. He said, you just get out of this, room, because, I will talk to my counterpart, that's Hamid Karzai, not with you. Just get out of this room. He was, driven out of the room. And after a week or so, or I think 1 month or so, he was surprisingly dropped as a national security advisor. Any Afghan will say he was the most, competent person as a security officials, as a leader of Afghanistan. So you never know what are the dynamics, whether these people can make any, integrate their voices into the policy making in White House. That is the problem, If you see state building, White has failed grossly because, the US have a Western concept of, state building, whereby they want a very active civil society. They want full respect to, women rights. They want, very heavy democracy, heavy dose of democracy. Now, in this locale, those things doesn't hold. Those are not pragmatic in these things. I'm not saying that, it should be abandoned. But, a judicious blend has to be taken. Nobody gives a damn care into those things. Overnight, they will, bring in, they'll fly an expert in military robes, and make them occupy in all the policy making, domain of Afghanistan. Next day, the UN is not going to be left behind the race. They will, fly experts from climate change to conflict, in Afghanistan. And, and the whole policy making domain is completely hijacked, with absolutely no participation of the people whose voice matter, of the people who know the context, of the people, who really can, help making more practical policies. As a result of which, all these hopeless policies are being made. And all this, I've seen this drama in Afghanistan, all these people, who have fascinating, intimate knowledge about, their country has been, confined to cheerleader of their, military expert who is sitting as a policy head.
And I think, considering we both have some interactions with the social sector, in your book, you have very clearly, outrightly, in a very dangerous note, you have mentioned that many NGOs, international aid agencies, have also played their pivotal role in just keeping this blindfold on the international arena.
Just 1 minute, just 1 minute, I'll quote two small example, and you'll understand what blunder has happened in Afghanistan, So I went to Kandahar. And, there is the district governor, which is the equivalent of, district collector in India, So there is an American agency, I'm not going to name them, maybe they'll sue me, So that's why I'll not name them. So they have, distributed laptop to all this, Dell laptop to all this district governor in the name of e-governance. So I met, 3-4 of them in one of the training. I asked so how are you doing e-governance with the laptop? They said, look, we don't know how to use laptop. A. B is that, you were sitting in districts like Spin Boldak and all those areas, Arghandab, which is totally taken over by Taliban. This was 5-6 years back. So, we don't go to our office. There is no electricity, nothing. So, I just said, then what is the use of the laptop? He said, our son and daughter watch Bollywood movie with this laptop. So that was e-governance, fine. Now, even simple thing, how you can make a massive change. Like I was doing a training of, Afghan civil servant. We started a course in line with this IS Administrative College, Mussoorie. and in which I was teaching, orienting them on pro-poor governance. So one of the district governors shouted at me, "Bloody hell, what are you talking about? Pro-poor governance, pro-poor governance. We have a budget of $300 and you're talking about pro-poor governance. What the hell will you do with $300? I said, "Okay, sir. Tell me one thing for which people come to you mostly." And everybody said Tazkira. Tazkira is the equivalent of Aadhaar. I say, "Okay, fine, let's do a voting. How much time a person has to visit, in order to do a Tazkira?" And the average voting was coming 2.5. I said, "Sir, let's attach a cost, like to and fro travel cost and all those things." The cost was coming $126, So I said, "Okay, now you reform your system and tell me, is there a way by which you can, keep the same, fast track the same services maybe in 1 or 2 days?" And everybody said, "Yes, we can be doing it in 2 days." And the cost was now coming down to $50 or $56 precisely. So I said, "Look, a cost that is pinching the pocket of a poor by $126, if you can give the same service in $56, is that not a pro-poor governance?" They said, "Like, we're never trained like that. We're told that, doling out a lot of resources is pro-poor governance. We don't have resources for sitting idle."
I think the most uncommon thing to be visible here is the common sense, I guess. And the systems thinking is totally missing.
Completely.
And I think you rightly quoted your experiences out of Afghanistan, because a very dear friend of ours and a patron and a very noted former Mint editor who is part of our group, he has been asking, is it out of your wisdom of hindsight or your personal experiences? I think you've just quoted that very well of how you have perceived it. So I'm eagerly waiting for your third book to come, and possibly you will take Dr. Tharoor's advice into that as well. And a pinch of China would definitely be required, and also other parts. There are a few more questions that have come. But before I move on to those questions, because we have a timeline of 10 more minutes to go, we will take, we have former LIC chairman Nilesh Sathe, who has asked a very pertinent question. He's based out of Nagpur, and I'm taking the liberty of asking this question on his behalf. So while he says White House is squarely responsible and should accept the blame for the chaos in Afghanistan, rightly said after reading your book and research, it definitely comes out. Instead of improving its economy, it destroyed its economy largely. Now it's advantage China. Is India's foreign policy on Afghanistan on right path, or it should change its policy drastically? Any thoughts on this, Sujeet?
Very, very, good question. I was expecting this question, So if you, divide the role that India played in Afghanistan, and divide it in two parts. So one is the civilian goodwill part, and the second part is the strategic part. India played the civilian goodwill card, exceptionally well. There was a poll done by BBC London, I think in 2010, in which, the Afghans voted India as the most popular friendly country, with a lot of bonhomie generosity in Afghanistan. So that part has been, played brilliantly well, The second part is the strategic part, That India has never played well, even during the time of UPA, and even now, if I can tell at the expense of, like saying it outrightly. Why I'm saying so? In 2010, when the whole world was realizing that, Taliban cannot be defeated, there has to be a peace process, and the whole world was making amend to their long-standing position of there is good Taliban and bad Taliban. India strict his gun. No. There is only bad Taliban and bad Taliban. There cannot be good Taliban. So they never made that, that strategic, change in their position. As a result of which, they're completely sidelined in any installment of peace process. They're never in the game. Their skin was never into the game. So that was, one blunder. Second thing is that if you see Russia, if you see a few other countries, UK, so they are smart players. They're, putting stakes in every, all the constituents of Afghan policy, all the leaders, India was centrally dependent on Ashraf Ghani, which was neck deep on corrupt and further with brutal arrogance, So he was, he was sinking. India couldn't see it, and put all their stake into a president, who was on the verge of, going out. So and India expected that, President Ghani is going to bring India amid thick of things, about Afghanistan policy, which never happened. The third thing was that the over-dependence on US. India realized that, India thought that, US is going to protect our strategic stake, and US, after, leading India to the garden part, abandoned India all of a sudden in the last installment of peace process, because they have to cover their own back. They knew that they're collapsing, they're failing. So this time, for, some remedial action to save their face rather than, bringing India into thick of things. So these all played a big role. And above all, I say, like, this with very, profound understanding, is that, India should have, taken it, like, if you see the policy of UPA and the current government, I don't see any change in the policy. It's basically extension of the same policy, which is going on in UPA. I somehow, and a person who reads ferociously, about Afghanistan, I never see the articulation of Indian policy. I don't know if Ajit Doval is, keeping it in his, wardrobe and, not allowing anybody to read, but I don't see the articulation of strategic policy of India about Afghanistan. I think a lot of time and effort is required in that direction. Yeah.
Great. So I think while we have 7 more minutes, I will give the mic now to Dr. Ila Joshi, who is part of the academia from MIT University here in Noida. She is a patron. Ila, you have a question. You may please ask a question. Open your video in case you wish to, but you may please ask a question.
Thank you so much, Mohit, and thank you, sir, for such an informative talk. I just have like 2 queries. I mean, listening from your experiences and the visuals that we had recently after, what happened, what unfolded in Afghanistan, I just have a query, like, do you think, sir, that as an international community somewhere also failed, in the sense that when we talk about such crisis, we have humanitarian laws, the Geneva Conventions and all. I mean, no one even talked about it. So somewhere it was seen as a failure of the international community to actually acknowledge the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan and to take action. And secondly, sir, do you think that like when we talk about Indian foreign policy, so as you said that, China, Pakistan and Central Asia, I mean, India has been trying really hard, I mean, to develop relations with Central Asia, in the sense that, through Afghanistan. So now we have this dialogue going on with Central Asia. Do you think that it's a 2-pronged strategy that India is adopting, keeping in mind the geostrategic realities right now, that we have to somewhere, we have to, whatever investments we had made in Afghanistan, so somewhere we have to take that into consideration, and hence we need to develop our relations with Central Asia in a better way. And secondly, there is no other way to do it than to, also, slightly, slowly, maybe develop relations with Afghanistan. No, Taliban, not, suddenly, but yeah, in a as we saw that recently we had this India sent that humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. So probably that is the way that Indian foreign policy is, 2-pronged strategy that India is trying. So just a query, sir.
Okay. So the first part, that right now every country in the world, and I was discussing with few of the people I know, who works in the diplomatic circle of different countries because of my international posting for almost 15 years. So all of them are, caught in this catch-22 situation. Is that if they go ahead and establish an embassy or a high commission in Kabul, basically that means they are legitimizing the Afghan government, Taliban government, which nobody wants. And if they don't do that, then like the people are going to die. Like, as I'm getting direct report from the field, is leading to a catastrophic situation. Where people will die from hunger. Post December, something like that. So everybody is watching, and and there's a wait and watch, like how others are moving, and then we'll accordingly move. I'm glad that India has at least sent a like 50 million metric ton of wheat and also some medical supplies. Now in India, unfortunately, we have standard foreign policy mold. We don't think beyond that. We don't go beyond that. These are we treat them as a rhetoric. So I think the most pragmatic step for India right now would be to open a humanitarian aid office in Kabul. Now, this is not written in any foreign policy manual, but I'm telling you, this is going to be a super hit formula, in the sense that, opening a development coordination office doesn't mean legitimizing Afghan Taliban government. Fine. It means, you are for the people. You can make that message very loud and clear. And also, we have tremendous civilian goodwill. We must ride that path, we must abandon the people just because there's a Taliban government sitting there. We should go there and, start a development coordination office. And parallelly, bulk of this negotiation, parleys, discussions, all those strategic conversation, as Shashi Tharoor was saying, is going to happen in the Doha. That is the destination next for Kabul. So, right now, all those hectic parleyings are happening there. India must, make a diplomatic post within the embassy of Doha there. Depute a senior Indian foreign officer, IFS, officer, and ask her or him to discuss with the wide range of other actors, Western actors, US, UK, recalibrate our strategies, and see what is practical, what is feasible, how others are moving, and then perhaps make a more objective and informed call about what should be our next diplomatic step in Afghanistan. Now, if tomorrow US or UK, or Germany, France, they recognize Taliban, I'm telling you, India has to follow the suit. India will also do that, but do it in a very informed way, in a very calculative way. So my suggestion would be, a development aid office in Kabul, plus a foreign policy like post in Doha for active negotiation, parlays and all those things to recalibrate our strategy for Afghanistan.
Thank you, Sujeet. I think that also sums up to some of the questions from our patrons who have asked, what can we do, especially when the violation of human rights is happening and the persecution and the brutality. But I think you have rightly summed it up in your last answer. We'll follow the suit. We started on time. We will end it on time as well. It's like listening to those old nostalgic days of 60 minutes or TDK or the T-series cassette, so that at least we maintain that flow. I'm very, very thankful to you, Sujeet, for this, and also to the Rupa Publications for introducing this book to me. While a couple of days ago, we had a session on Afghanistan, but that was more towards the history from the mid-19th century towards the Durand Line, and also the impact now that we can feel. But people who have joined in, they have already sent me messages that this was like a sequel to that discussion, because in the history, we spoke about the Zan, Zar and Zameen, which has been the blood-soaked land of Afghanistan, especially when the UK talks about it, losing the battle in those times. And now again, in your book, you have mentioned about Helmand, where UK again lost this with their kind of policies. And I think they will live with that horror, as if somebody is bowling to Sachin Tendulkar and he's hitting 6 sixes in 1 over. That's the kind of nightmare the UK might have. I would strongly recommend this book to everyone who is into any kind of policy making, design thinking, systems thinking, and you will come across something very global in terms of the perspective. And it's a very, very large macro view. Any parting thoughts, Sujeet, that you would like to give to all the people who could join in today?
It's a lovely book, and I've in some places, I've analyzed a lot of data, but in some places I've also given my own experience, first-hand experience. I've dealt with, I've had a wide range of discussion with the poppy growing farmers to the, drug lord or drug kingpin, if I can say, who browbeats the farmers to, grow poppy. From the ordinary last person, in Afghanistan, sitting in a remote and inaccessible village of Badakhshan or Kandahar, to the highest echelons of policy making, sitting in Kabul, to the locally elected Shura leader, to the parliamentarian, So I have, conversed with the entire length and breadth of the country, and I have put those experiences into the book, I'm sure you'll enjoy, and particularly those, who are interested in foreign policies and all those things. This is a book for them. As Shashi Tharoor is saying, I will definitely work on my third book, also Afghanistan. And in the meanwhile, I pray that, peace returns to Afghanistan. People get, what they're due, because they are tired of war, spanning over 2-3 decades, and hope some good sense prevail on US and the Western leadership on how to deal with a volatile and, conflict local like Afghanistan in future.
Fantastic. And also to all the people, Sujeet, who would have watched Narcos at Netflix and thought that that's a great series, because what they are seeing is just the 2% or 3% of the poppy trade. They should actually read your book to create much better series rather than the Narcos that had come. That will give the real picture of the world in terms of the opium trade that's happening. Many, many thanks, Sujeet, and many congratulations for the book. We will put our word across to all our patrons and to whomever we meet, especially the colleges that we work closely with in the policy making stream. We would be sending it. Thank you very much, Sujeet, for investing your time with us, and to everyone who could devote their time for this very informative session. Thank you very much. Have a great evening. Namaskar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohit.